Hello guys, Croft is here. Today we're gonna talk about what exactly happened to Alan Dutch Schaefer, the iconic character that famously survived his encounter with the yautcha hunter. It's actually kind of weird that despite his legendary performance, Arnold Shawatzneger never returned as Dutch in any sequel film. So this absence left fans wondering what exactly happened to Dutch after 1987. The only on-film glimpse to Dutch we get is an alternate post-credits scene in Killer of Killers with Dutch in a frozen crate. So let's break down exactly how Dutch ended up there, as over the years, various alternate continuities from movie scripts and novels to comics and video games have offered different fates for Dutch. We'll cover the official canon version, then all cancelled cameos and cancelled Predator 3 script, as well as the timeline from the comics and, most importantly, Dutch's tapes, in which Arnold Shawatzneger himself recounts what happened to Dutch after Predator encounter in 1987.
These tapes are my personal testimony. I'm not dead yet. My name is Dutch, and this is my story.
So let's cover absolutely everything, as there are many versions as to what happened to Dutch. And let's start with the official outcome in 1987, Dutch's disappearance. In the original film's ending, Dutch narrowly escapes the jungle predator's self-destruct explosion and is airlifted out of the jungle, traumatized but alive. In the official canon of the films, Dutch simply disappeared after the events of Predator. However, the Predator 2 novelization reveals that Agent Peter Keyes, the government operative in Predator 2, visited Dutch in the hospital weeks after the Valverde incident. Peter Keyes found Dutch ill with radiation sickness from the Predator's blast. Dutch was later interviewed about the encounter, but soon ripped out his IVs and escaped the hospital, going off-grid and never being seen again. So by the time of Predator 2 set in 1997, Dutch's fate is an open question. However, there is one line in an early draft for Predator 2 with Peter Keyes informing Detective Harrigan that the one survivor disappeared without a trace 6 months later. However, the final film completely omitted any mention of Dutch, but actor Gary Busey, who played Keyes, later said that Dutch was lost about 9 weeks after the first movie's events, implying that Dutch either died or vanished mysteriously. So in any case, Dutch never officially reappears in any of the films, making his ultimate fate a mystery in an on-screen canon. Now let's cover all the cancelled film cameos with Dutch and unmade sequels. Because Arnold Shawatzneger's performance as Dutch was so iconic, filmmakers often tried and failed to bring him back. So here are the major cancelled appearances and abandoned ideas for Dutch in the films. Early on, Predator 2 was envisioned as a buddy cop style team-up with Arnold Shawatzneger as Dutch and actor Patrick Swayze. However, Shawatzneger declined due to salary disputes and Terminator 2 commitments. The writers Jim and John Thomas even wrote a teaser of a Predator picking Dutch as its next target, envisioning the sequel opening at the 1987 blast crater where an invisible Predator hand finds the lost gauntlet and logs Dutch as prey. Also, in the Predator 2 first draft, Dutch had a brief cameo via video footage of him being debriefed after Valverde. However, by the second draft, he was only mentioned in the dialogue as having disappeared without a trace, and finally, in the final film, even that reference was removed. So ultimately, Dutch was written out of the Predator 2 movie due to Arnold's absence and salary disputes. Interestingly, actress Elpidia Carrillo did film a cameo as Anna for Predator 2, but that too was cut from the final movie. However, what's truly fascinating is that Dutch almost appeared in Alien vs Predator of 2004. Years after the movie came out, director Paul Anderson revealed that Shawatzneger was open to a Dutch cameo at the end of AVP, but only if he lost the 2003 California gubernatorial election. Had he not become governor, Arnold would have filmed a stinger scene as Dutch reportedly at his home to accommodate his schedule. But unfortunately, since he won the election, this cameo never materialized and AVP proceeded with no Dutch. It almost seems like Dutch was planned to be in every single Predator movie, but for some unfortunate circumstances, this never materialized, almost like a bad fate. Dutch also almost appeared in Predators of 2010. Producer Robert Rodriguez had long hoped to bring Dutch back. In 1996, Rodriguez wrote an early Predator 3 script in which Dutch is kidnapped by Earth's military and handed over to Predators as a part of a twisted deal, which ended up with Dutch forced into a gladiatorial combat on an alien Predator planet. That seemed like an amazing idea, but unfortunately this wild script was shelved for years. So when The Predators was finally made in 2010 with a new script, Rodriguez still wanted an Arnold cameo. For that reason, an alternate ending was scripted where after Royce and Isabel survived the Predator game Reserve Planet, an older Dutch would appear. One leaked draft had a battered Dutch emerge with a team of Predators, implying that he had joined the Predator hunting party. It's actually kind of unclear how serious this ending ever was, as later Rodriguez called it a false ending to catch the leaks, but he did confirm that he approached Arnold about reappearing. Then Shawatzneger, who was just leaving the California governor position, ultimately passed on Predators, so Dutch stayed absent yet again. However, filmmakers never gave up on trying to bring Dutch back, which they also tried for The Predator of 2018. Shane Black offered Shawatzneger a final scene cameo as Dutch where he would show up at the end to recruit the surviving heroes. In fact, the early script for The Predator had Arnold survive and say, "Come to me if you want to live," a cheeky nod to Arnold's Terminator line, inviting Quinn, Casey and Roy to join a larger fight against the Predators. But Arnold yet again turned it down, feeling that that part was too small. So in the end, the cameo was scrapped and the movie instead ended with the tease of the Predator killer suit rather than Dutch. So on one hand, it would be cool to see Dutch returning in The Predator, but at the same time I understand that Shawatzneger wanted a bigger role, and I also think that fans would love to see Shawatzneger play a way bigger part in the movie than just a simple cameo. Ultimately, Arnold said that he would have reconsidered if Dutch had a more significant role. So each of these unrealized cameos show how Dutch's legend loomed large. And the films consistently tried to capitalize on the character, but circumstances kept him off screen. And one of the most surprising alternate continuities emerges from the 2025 animated film Predator: Killer of Killers. An alternate post-credit scene features Dutch among a row of human survivors stored in frozen stasis pods in a yautcha warehouse. This version implies that Dutch didn't simply vanish on Earth, he was actually taken like other human soldiers. The Predators, fascinated by worthy opponents, may have tracked Dutch down years after the Valverde incident, capturing him alive rather than killing him. So in this alternate continuity, Dutch's legendary victory made him too valuable to kill. So instead the yautcha preserved him as a prime trophy, just like Kenji and Ursa. So they froze him alongside other elite survivors such as Mike Harrigan and intriguingly Naru from Prey. This cryostasis warehouse suggests that Predators maintain a curated archive of their greatest human adversaries, possibly thawing them for ritualized hunts, gladiator battles, or studying them for strategic insight. Dutch's presence in one of these spots fits perfectly with the idea that his disappearance was never voluntary or governmental. He was abducted by the very species he once defeated, and they kept him alive as a relic of honor within the hunter's vaults. Unfortunately, we don't know the exact date of this warehouse scene, but all the clues point that it happens in the late 21st century or possibly 22nd century, so Dutch could have been frozen there for decades. However, it still remains unclear whether this animated ending is meant to directly connect to the live-action movie canon, or if it functions as a clever Easter egg for fans, ultimately leaving Dutch's fate tantalizingly ambiguous. But before we get to the Dutch's tapes, in which Arnold Shawatzneger himself recounts his life after the Valverde incident, let's examine the comic book continuity and the Schaefer saga. After Predator's release, Dark Horse Comics expanded the universe through stories centered on Dutch's brother, Detective John Schaefer. Across several series, John's search for his missing brother becomes a key thread that deepens the franchise's mythology. The story starts in Predator Concrete Jungle comic. John Schaefer battles a Predator in New York City and meets General Phillips, Dutch's former commander. Phillips confirms that Dutch vanished after the Valverde mission, sparking government interest in extraterrestrial threats. Interestingly, Dutch never reappears, but his disappearance motivates John's fight. In another comic book, Predator Cold War, John is forced into a mission in Siberia with Phillips promising details about Dutch in exchange for cooperation. After another deadly Predator encounter, John survives but learns nothing new as Dutch's fate remains a mystery. Then in Predator Dark River of 1996, John travels to South America following rumors that Dutch was infected by Predator blood and abandoned in the jungle. However, the story is revealed to be a trap set by Phillips using Dutch as bait. John Schaefer survives again, furious and still searching for his missing brother, Dutch. After Dark River, John's storyline ends without a closure, leaving Dutch's disappearance completely unresolved in the comics. However, later, Predator vs. Judge Dredd introduced one of Dutch's distant descendants, a criminal scavenger named simply Schaefer. This comic book doesn't give us anything new about Dutch's fate, however, this criminal is explicitly stated to be a distant descendant of Dutch Schaefer. Although that's all there is about Dutch in the comics, Dutch's post-Predator story continued through novels and audio works, each offering a different perspective on his fate. Predator 2 novelization reveals that Dutch escaped the hospital after suffering radiation sickness from the Predator's explosion. Though presumed dying, he vanished, leaving his survival uncertain. Then there is another novel, Predator South China Sea of 2008. This novel portrays Dutch under the alias Onyx, mentoring a new hunter named John Gustad. Living off the grid, he trains others to face predators, showing a seasoned, world-weary version of Old Man Dutch, but still devoted to the fight. Predator Stalking Shadows of 2020 is a prequel novel to Predator Hunting Grounds, and it details Dutch's work with special forces in the 90s under alias like Agent Schaefer. In the novel, Dutch trains recruits for the WOLF task force, bridging the gap between the original film and his later appearances in the game and its audio logs. Which leads us to the most reliable version of what happened to Dutch, which is audio dramas called the Dutch tapes. This unique medium is the set of tape recordings voiced by Arnold Shawatzneger himself, available in the video game Predator Hunting Grounds. These audio logs function like a short story or diary narrated by Dutch, recounting his life after the first film. He becomes an underground predator hunter, sometimes cooperating with the government agents like Peter Keyes, but always on his own terms. So in a series of unlockable cassette tapes, Dutch narrates how he became obsessed with hunting the predators after 1987. These cassette tapes are pretty long, but I'm going to summarize all the key points from Dutch's tapes. After escaping the hospital, Dutch went off the grid and tracked down clues about the Predator's visits to Earth, even returning to the Guatemala jungle to learn from local legends. He realized that predators or demons have been coming for centuries. So by 1997, Dutch had formed a small private military team composed of hunted ex-soldiers like himself, but in reality he was using his men as bait to lure in another predator, which is a morally grey shift in Dutch's character born from his insane obsession. So his gamble eventually paid off in the Congo, where a predator indeed showed up after his team found skinned corpses. And in the following fight, a straight bullet ignited an explosion that killed both the Predator and Dutch's entire team. However, Dutch survived, and seizing the moment, he took the Predator's tech and faked his own death, letting the authorities think that he perished in the blast. And this allowed Dutch to stay under the radar for a while. So in 1997, when the events of Predator 2 took place, hearing about a heatwave and violent gang war in Los Angeles, Dutch correctly predicted a Predator hunt. So he headed towards LA, but arrived too late as Detective Harrigan had already killed the city Predator and Dutch was captured by OWLF agents in the aftermath. Then, using the stolen Predator's technology he'd kept, Dutch negotiated a deal with the OWLF. They agreed that he would cooperate and share intel, but on his own terms, essentially working with them, not for them. and this uneasy partnership led to over a decade of successful joint operations, ambushing predators on Earth and recovering their weapons. Then in 2008, Dutch had a horrifying encounter in Laos with a female predator. She engulfed him in a tightening net that nearly killed him, and Dutch, after 20 years of fighting, was ready to accept death. However, in an unexpected act of mercy, the predator released him and vanished, leaving Dutch alive but scarred with a permanent grit pattern on the side of his face. Dutch speculates that she recognized him and that his hunts were known among the yautcha as legend, and perhaps she spared him out of respect. By 2018, the government's predator research group had changed. OWLF was shut down and replaced by Project Stargazer, as seen in The Predator of 2018. Dutch, however, observes that Stargazer was incompetent and corrupt, capturing a live predator in Mexico, a terrible idea in Dutch's eyes. The game lore even states that Dutch was present off-screen during the 2018 incident, watching the Stargazer's chaos unfold. After the carnage caused by the captive predator's escape, Stargazer was nearly dismantled, and Dutch continued his own fight in the shadows of South America. So by 2025, Dutch was 79 years old but still in the fight. Gravely wounded by a predator, he agreed to an experimental treatment that mixed yautcha DNA with his own, a procedure that rejuvenated his body and greatly increased his strength and recovery. On the side note, one character in the comics was able to extend his life by centuries by using yautcha's blood. So now, Dutch technically becomes a yautcha hybrid. Restored to prime condition, Dutch rejoins a revamped OWLF unit alongside Sean Keyes, son of Peter Keyes, and Isabel Nussenbaum, the sniper from the Predators of 2010. In the tapes, Dutch notes that predator incursions have increased in the recent years, and he fears that the yautcha may eventually see humanity's resistance as an outright challenge. But until then, he is determined to hunt the hunters and defend Earth. So in essence, the Hunting Ground tapes present Dutch as a seasoned warrior who has spent his life preparing for the predator's return. So this video game narrative is currently the most detailed account of Dutch's life after 1987, effectively giving him the old soldier arc fans have long imagined, complete with a sci-fi twist that extends his life via predator DNA. However, there is another version of Dutch's fate in the arcade game Aliens vs Predator that leads us to a really dark and pretty insane theory. A 1994 arcade game gave Dutch a very different, non-canon fate. In Capcom's arcade game, one of the playable heroes is Major D. Schaefer, a cybernetically enhanced soldier. This character is clearly based on Dutch in appearance and name, but with a wild sci-fi backstory. He is a one-armed cyborg created to fight extraterrestrials, having lost his right arm in the Second Alien War and had it replaced with a small gun weapon prosthetic. The game is set in the future, and the story involves colonial marines and Weyland-Yutani, implying that this version of Dutch is active long after the events of 1987. In the gameplay, Cyborg Dutch even teams up with predators to stop an alien outbreak on Earth. According to the game's lore, Major Schaefer isn't literally the same person as Alan Dutch Schaefer, but for all intents and purposes, it's an alternate universe Dutch. We can also view this version of Dutch as a cyborg created through continual augmentation of the original human Dutch Schaefer after the events of Predator Hunting Grounds. So over time, these enhancements allowed him to survive far beyond the normal human lifespan, ultimately living well into the 22nd century. So in this continuity, the cyborg Dutch joins the colonial marines to continue fighting, this time against the xenomorph threat. Aside from these two games, Dutch doesn't physically appear in any other games. He's only mentioned in passing in some Predator shooters. So Predator Hunting Grounds and the AVP arcade game stand out as the key alternate Dutch game storylines. One gives him a serious, lore-heavy continuation, and the other turns him into a cybernetic alien-fighting commando. But now we get to probably the most interesting part of the video, which is fan theories and speculations, and the possible crossover with the Terminator franchise. The most insane theory, called Cyber-Dutch theory, suggests that Dutch was taken by a secret government agency and became a prototype for a Terminator soldier. So Dutch didn't simply vanish after Valverde, but he was taken by the government. Having defeated a predator with nothing but human grit and military skill, Dutch became a unique asset. So according to this theory, Dutch was slowly dying due to the radiation poisoning from the nuclear blast. And to keep Dutch alive, because he had valuable and unique knowledge of the predator hunter, the scientists were slowly replacing parts of his body with cybernetic parts. And over time, Dutch literally turned into a cyborg, with his entire body becoming a machine. In secret facilities, likely in partnership with early Cyberdyne systems, scientists analyzed Dutch's neural patterns, stress responses, and muscle structure. Cyberdyne's public focus was robotics, but its classified work involved creating the ideal man-machine hybrid. Dutch's biometric data became the foundation for their infiltration units, eventually leading to the T-800 program. And the biggest piece of evidence for this theory is the AVP arcade game mentioned earlier. In this game, Cyborg Dutch carries the serial number SDS170A3, which can be interpreted as Cyberdyne systems hinting at a Dutch-based prototype. So the identical appearance between Dutch and the Terminator is reinterpreted not as a coincidence but as a continuity. Cyberdyne modeled the Terminator's body, the perfect soldier, on Dutch himself, who managed to defeat the ultimate galaxy's hunter, the Predator. And this theory also perfectly ties into the Predator of 2018, which hints at increasing yautcha incursions and potential full-scale invasion. If the government anticipated a larger extraterrestrial threat, they would need more than one Dutch Schaefer. Actually, they would need an army of perfect soldiers. So according to this theory, Dutch became a template for an entire line of engineered soldiers, machines built to fight the predators who once nearly killed Dutch. So according to this wild interpretation, Dutch didn't just fade into obscurity, he became the prototype for humanity's ultimate defense. And ironically, its future downfall if we merge Alien and Terminator universes. However, this is just a theory, and ultimately until an official film or show brings Dutch back, we can keep theorizing and any of the above mentioned possibilities could become true. Dutch's fate is one of the biggest mysteries in the entire franchise, and since this iconic character kickstarted the franchise, his return would be absolutely epic. Even though I didn't really like the latest movie, Predator Badlands, I'm sure Disney will pay Arnold enough to bring him back and they'll give him a satisfying role. But until then, the question about Dutch's fate remains open. So thank you guys for watching, let me know your theories about Dutch, and do you think we'll ever see him in the future movies? Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to join the Patreon for extra support. Also, like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel for more content. My name is Croft and I'll see you in the next video.